Tanya Talaga, Anine, Bouzou.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. First, let me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Marie-André Lamontagne, and I am the Director of Programming of the Montreal Bleu Metropolis Literary International Festival, full name, whose 26th edition will take place from April 25 to 28, 2024. And we will have the great pleasure to welcome you at the festival, Tanya Talaga, since you are the winner of the 2024 Bleu Metropolis First People Prize, and you will come to Montreal to receive it. In the past year, this prize was awarded, for instance, to Thomas King and to Lee Miracle, to name just a few. And reading your book, All Our Relations, Finding the Path Forward, one can see that these two Indigenous writers mean a lot for you, to you. Now that you will receive that prize, what does that mean to you, the Bleu Metropolis First People Prize?
I'm incredibly honored, Wachea and Miigwech, for this award. I can't really believe it, especially that I'm being honored in Montreal by Blue Metropolis, and you've given this award as well to two of my dear, dear friends. Of course, the late Lee
Yeah.
Miracle, who was such a champion of mine, and I always was a champion of hers too. And I miss her dearly, and I'm grateful that you noticed the influence of her
Mm,
in all our relations, because she was definitely there when I started to write this
mm,
book. And also too, Thomas King,
mm,
you know, um, his work, his Massey lectures, The Inconvenient Indian. I kept his Massey lectures beside me when I wrote my first book, Seven Fallen Feathers.
mm.
And I always take
Yeah.
comfort in what he does. Yes. And how he frames sentences, the way he speaks, the plain talk, and
Mm.
how he re-examines the history of the country that we now call Canada. Those two authors have been such big mentors to me. So to know that I am receiving this award and they have as well, it
Mm.
means so much to me. I can't begin to tell you.
One can say that as a writer, you are not alone in your writing. You are surrounded by these voices and these people. You are a journalist for many years at the Toronto Star, and now you are columnist at the Globe and Mail. You cover many topics from education to healthcare and foreign news. Your two books of essays, we mentioned again, Indigenous Seven Fallen Feathers, the first one, and then All Our Relations, deal with the indigenous issues, and more specifically with young indigenous people. We are talking here of mental health, suicide, alcohol, and traumas. Um, did you feel you were giving them a voice to these young men?
I hope so. I really hope so. I, when I write about our youth, I want to show the rest of Canada that our children matter to us, our children are loved, and that they are members of communities. They have families, they have friends. They're not just statistics. They're not just a number in a report or in a news reel or a news item that you watch or read about. They are real people, they're real children, and they did not ask to be born in the circumstances in which they were born into. I mean, none of our kids asked to be born in communities that don't have clean running water or high schools or doctors, no health care. It's really quite remarkable in a country called Canada that we have this for my community members in Northern Ontario. And the same can be said for Northern Quebec. The same can be said for Saskatchewan,
Mm.
Alberta, Northern BC. We see this time and time again. The the lack of what I call in all our relations the social determinants of health, right? The things
Mm,
needed that we know to grow children, grow healthy children, um, a safe home, a fridge full of food, a pathway to an education,
mm,
clean running water, someone who holds you at night and tells you that they love you, a family member that tells you that you matter.
mm,
These are how we build our children, you know, and our children are often missing parts of those equations because of colonization and because of a lack of Canada adhering to the treaties that were signed to form this country in the first place. And so, for many of our youth, we're not starting on the same playing field as the rest of Canadian children. And we have to correct that in order to make this entire country a better place for all of our kids,
yeah,
not just autochtone, not just our children, but for
yeah.
all.
This is probably the reason why the subtitle of all our relations is finding the path forward.
Mm.
So this is a path still to be found
Mhm.
uh,
Absolutely.
for
Yes.
the indigenous people. Yeah.
Hmm.
Are we
Hmm.
talking here about parallel paths, one leading to a better knowledge of the past and awareness for, let's say, allochthone, and
Hmm.
the other aspiring to healing?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. There are parallel paths, but I hope that those paths become one,
Yeah,
right?
will merge, huh?
You know, because we are still going through a truth-telling process in this country and re-looking at how our stories are told, how history of this country is told. And you know, it's a famous saying that you always hear that you have to know the past in order to go forward with the future. And that's so true in this country as well. And for the longest time, we've only been hearing the voices or the loudest voices, the voices that we listen to and we learn from in our classrooms, in our universities, in our colleges, in our CEGEPs have been those of those who have colonized us and who see history in a certain way, and we see it in a different way. All of our people have experienced the growth of Canada, the formation of Canada in different ways. And it benefits all of us to learn the truth of what happened here, what happened in residential schools, why we have something called the Indian Act still on our books, why we have the quote unquote reserve system, why we have inequality, and why you see so many of our people on the streets, so many of our people having a hard time. You need to look at what's happened in the past and what has traumatized our families for
Mm,
generations that
mm,
have led us to this place and how we need to come out of this. And we can't do it alone. We have to do it with our partners. We have to do it with allies. And so when we talk about people coming together to walk on the path forward, we
mm,
need to do it, all of us,
yeah.
because we're all here together now.
Mm,
And no one is sending anybody back to where they came from.
mm,
We have to make it work. And I
mm,
know we can. I have to have hope that
mm.
we'll walk all of us eventually together on that path.
Yeah, on one path. Talking of the past, Seven Fallen Feathers tell the tragic story of seven Indigenous high school students who died tragically in Thunder Bay. One of them, one of these boys, was the grandson of Nerval Morisseau, the famed Ojibwe painter. His name was Cale Morisseau.
Kyle, yeah.
He was 17 when he was found dead in the McIntyre River. What has changed or not changed between the time of his grandfather in the 40s and 50s and the time of Cale in the indigenous reality? We made progress.
Two steps forward, one step back, right?
Wow.
There is progress and then there isn't progress. I mean, the progress is that we're having this discussion, you and I, and
Mm,
that you have recognized our writings and our works and our voices. That wasn't necessarily the case when Lee Miracle was starting out. her books were banned in libraries across this country. You know, she didn't receive the notoriety and the fame that she should have received when she was a young writer because Canada wasn't ready to listen then. Canada wasn't hearing, you know, that was before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, before there was widespread discussion of what has happened in over 140 residential schools that were run by the Christian churches but funded by the government of Canada. And this was before everyone talked about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. There
Mhm.
is an awareness now. And so when you ask me, are things getting better? At least we're talking about it. At
Mhm.
least it's in the media, it's getting heard. We have a long way to go, though, to still get to the point where, for instance, in Thunder Bay, our when our family members call to say we have a missing youth or child and we need help, that call is answered still.
Mm. Yeah,
We are
yeah, yeah. And,
still waiting for that day
and,
to happen.
and right away, not waiting, right away.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Aboriginal people are in Australia. You mentioned that in your book, in Australia, Norway, Russia, with the Samis people, Inuit, of course, in the northern part of Canada, in Brazil, also in United States. Beyond their Aboriginal origins, what do these people have in common? A trauma, essentially?
Yes, that's one of the things that we all have in common, but we have in common a love of the land, a
Mm,
tie to the land. We have in common the fact that we all say that our people have been in these places since the beginning of time, and that we have lived on these lands as Indigenous people with our own rules, with our own sets of what we now call governments. Um, we loved we had families. We lived on the land. We had our own systems that kept everything in place. And what we do share, all of us, is a violent displacement from
mm,
those social structures and from the land due to colonization, due to things like terra nullius, papal bulls,
mm,
and the march of the boats coming to South America, the boats coming to Australia, to North America to settle these lands because the land was thought to belong to no one,
mm,
right? Terra nullius, which was
mm,
the edict at the time from the churches and grasped by the empires of the day, the
mm,
French, the Portuguese, the English.
mm,
And so when we say we have things in common, we have those things in common. And we also have the same practices of colonization, such as boarding schools. We see boarding schools in the Sami lands, in Australia, in America, in Canada, residential schools, assimilation, taking language away from our people by taking the children away,
mm, mm.
by trying to change us.
Yeah, my last question will be a sort of a philosophical question. As for yourself, your father was a Polish Canadian, and your
Right.
mother an Anishinaabe. You grew on your mother grew on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation. The grandmother of your mother was a resident school survivor. Your uncles, the three brothers of your mother's, were in the child welfare system, and you learn in your 20s that your mother has brothers. All this is in your book. I mentioned in your book. You grew up in the city, had received a good education. You are a respected journalist. Your books have won several awards. What does it mean from a philosophical point of view to have a successful life for you? What does that mean?
Mhm. That is a very good question
Mm,
and a very hard question. What does it mean to have a successful life for me? That our youth are happy, that our youth have every success, every chance of hope, of love, of education, of having a good life in how they want to lead it. That is success to me, that my own children feel that they are just happy and they're free from fear,
yeah. And
free from racism. That's what
Yeah.
I hope for.
Yeah. And what did your mother mean by a successful life, do you think?
My mother.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely question. My mother gave everything for her children. My mother is my hero, right?
Mm,
She didn't get her high school education until she was in her 30s. She had a very difficult life, and she's one of the smartest people I know, one of the bravest people I know. And to her, it was education,
mm,
making sure that I had an education, my brother had an education. And she always told us that we were just as good as anybody else, and we could do it too.
yeah. And her grandmother.
And her grandmother said the same thing. And what those women went through, women of my mother's age, my grandmother, my Kokum, my great grandmother,
Mm,
my great great grandmother, what the maternal line went through from the beginning of Canada to now has been the mouth of genocide.
mm.
And we are coming to terms with it now. And I hope we're coming out of it now.
And to your two sons, what did mean being having a successful life, you think?
I have a son and a daughter, and
Ah, yeah.
I don't know what they think. Sometimes they think, Mom, they always question me and they tease me. They'll say, Mom, are you still writing chapter 3? For instance, like I'm always writing, and they like to bring me down to the level of just being their mom.
Yeah.
And they know that I hope for them
Mm,
to have the education that their grandparents did not have, that their
mm,
great grandparents didn't have, that none of us had really. I was the first generation from my mother's
mm,
line to go to university.
mm. So hope will be our last word. Tanya Talaga, I thank you very much. We are very happy, again, I say, we are very happy to welcome you at the Blue Metropolis Festival in Montreal. Friday, April 26, 2024 is the date to remember for your events. And I'm sure the audience will come and will be happy to meet you in person. See you soon in Montreal, Tanya Talaga.
I'll be on tour and I can't wait. I'm really excited to meet everyone.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye.